I'm Ryan O'Dowd, and you're listening to Ryan's Audiobooks on the Issues Magazine YouTube channel. Today we're continuing with Coup D'Etat by Edward Luttwak, Section 5-6. We're reading the beginning of Chapter 3, The Strategy of the Coup D'Etat. Quote, Dean Acheson used to tell a story about Chief Justice Taft, relating a conversation he had just had with an eminent man about the, quote, machinery of government, end quote. And you know, Taft said, with wonder in his voice, he really did believe that it is machinery. To move a nation, Roger Hilsman. Quote, under totalitarian conditions, knowledge of the labyrinth of transmission belts of the machinery of government equals supreme power. Close quote. The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. Overthrowing governments is not easy. The government will not only be protected by the professional defenses of the state, the armed forces, the police, and security agencies, but it will also be supported by a whole range of political forces. In a sophisticated and democratic society, these will include political parties, sectional interests, regional, ethnic, and religious groupings. Their interaction and mutual opposition results in a particular balance of forces which the government in some way represents. In less sophisticated societies, there may be a narrower range of such forces, but there will almost always be some political groups which support the status quo and therefore the government. If those who carry out the coup appear to shatter such a powerful structure merely by seizing a few buildings, arresting some political figures, and, quote, liberating the radio station, it is because their crucial achievement passes unnoticed. This is the dangerous and elaborate process by which the armed forces and the other means of coercion are neutralized, and the political forces temporarily forced into passivity. If we were revolutionaries, wanting to change the structure of society, our aim would be to destroy the power of some of the political forces, and the long and often bloody process of revolutionary attrition can achieve this. Our purpose is, however, quite different. We want to seize power within the present system, and we shall only stay in power if we embody some new status quo, supported by those very forces which a revolution may seek to destroy. Should we want to achieve fundamental social change, we can do so after we have become the government. This is perhaps a more efficient method, and certainly less painful one than that of the classic revolution. Though we will try to avoid all conflict with the political forces, some of them will almost certainly oppose a coup. But this opposition will largely subside when we have substituted our new status quo for the old one, and can enforce it by our control of the state bureaucracy and security forces. This period of transition, which comes after we have emerged into the open and before we are vested with the authority of the state, is the most critical phase of the coup. We shall then be carrying out the dual task of imposing our control on the machinery of state, while at the same time using it to impose our control on the country at large. Any resistance to the coup in the one will stimulate further resistance in the other, and if a chain reaction develops, the coup could be defeated. Our strategy, therefore, must be guided by two principal considerations: the need for maximum speed in the transitional phase, and the need to neutralize fully the forces which could oppose us both before and immediately after the coup. If in the operational phase of the coup we are at any stage delayed, then our essential weakness will emerge. We shall probably acquire a definite political coloration, and this in turn will lead to a concentration of those forces which oppose the tendency we represent, or are thought to represent. As long as the execution of the coup is rapid, and we are cloaked in anonymity, no particular political faction will have either a motive or an opportunity to oppose us. After all, we could be their potential allies. In any case, delay will lose us our principal advantage: the voluntary neutrality of the wait-and-see elements, and the involuntary neutrality of those forces which need time to concentrate and deploy for action. The need for maximum speed means that the many separate operations of the coup must be carried out almost simultaneously. This in turn requires a large number of people. Therefore, assuming that we start the planning of the coup with only a small group of political associates, most of the personnel we will need must be recruited. Further, our recruits must have the training and equipment that will enable them to take swift and determined action. There will usually be only one source of such recruits: the armed forces of the state itself. It is true that in many countries there are ethnic minorities which, being both traditionally anti-government and warlike, may seem to be the ideal recruits for a coup. These are typically hill people, like the Druze of Syria, the Kurds of Iraq, the Shans of Burma, and the Pathans of West Pakistan and Afghanistan. Because of their poverty and traditions, they would probably be easy to recruit, but to do so may lead to a nationalist reaction on the part of the majority people, and since the center of government are usually located in the majority areas, their opposition would be a further important obstacle to us. Another possible substitution for the subversion of the forces of the state is the organization of a party militia. When there's a combination of political freedom with an ineffectual maintenance of law and order, such militias are sometimes formed in order to, quote, protect party activities. In Weimar Germany, for example, apart from the Brown Shirts, there were the party militias of the Social Democrats, Communists, and the right-wing nationalist parties. Similar organizations, black shirts, green shirts, red shirts, and in the Middle East, silver shirts, spread in many countries in the wake of fascist and Nazi successes. In spite of their military bearing, their uniforms, and often extensive weaponry, in almost every instance of confrontation between such militias and the forces of the state, the former were defeated. Thus, when the Nazis tried to use the embryonic brown shirts in the 1923 Munich episode, they were easily overpowered by the police and Hitler was himself arrested. His subsequent rise to power was achieved by political means and not by the efforts of the brown shirts. In any case, in order to organize and equip a party militia, two scarce resources are needed: money and the freedom to do so. Recruiting forces from those maintained by the state requires neither. Therefore, while we will have to neutralize a whole range of forces, a distinctive approach will have to be used in the case of the means of coercion of the state. In dealing with the armed forces, the police and the security services, we will have to subvert some forces while neutralizing the rest. In the case of the political forces, the objective will be limited to their neutralization. Because of their capability for direct intervention, the armed forces and the other means of coercion in the state must be fully neutralized before the actual coup starts. The political forces can usually be dealt with immediately after the coup. In some situations, however, the political forces can also have an immediate impact on the course of events, and must therefore be treated on the same basis as the means of coercion of the state. In Russia, during the period of instability which followed the bourgeois February Revolution, the Railways Union emerged as a major source of direct power. Vikzhel, the All-Russian Committee of the Union of Railroad Employees, played a decisive role in the defeat of General Kornilov's putsch by simply refusing to work the railways carrying his shoulders on their way to Petrograd. Later, when Kerensky fled the city following Lenin's October coup and took refuge with Krasnov's army contingent, Vikzhel threatened to call a general strike, i.e. to leave Krasnov's troops stranded unless Kerensky negotiated peacefully with the Bolsheviks. Since the Bolsheviks had no serious intention of negotiating, this amounted to a request for unconditional surrender. In the peculiar conditions of Russia in 1917, the railways and those who controlled them were of crucial importance from the military point of view. Elsewhere there will be other political forces which can exert similar pressures. In poor countries where the majority of city dwellers can only buy food on a day-to-day basis, shopkeepers, if well organized, can bring great pressure to bear on the government by refusing to open their shops. Where there is a strong trade union movement, strikes can impede the vital process of establishing the authority on the government immediately after the coup. Religious and ethnic leaders can use the structures of their communities to organize mass demonstrations against the new regime. We must therefore identify and evaluate these political forces, and, if necessary, their leading personalities and coordinating bodies must be neutralized before the coup. Other political forces lacking such direct power will also have to be dealt with, but this will be part of the process of conciliation and accommodation which follows the coup. Neutralizing the defenses of the state. One of the outstanding features of modern states is their extensive and diversified security system. This is a consequence of the general breakdown in external security and internal stability which has been experienced in many areas of the world in the last 2 or 3 generations. Every state maintains armed forces, a police force, and some form of intelligence organization. Many states find it necessary to have paramilitary gendarmeries, duplicate security services, and other variations on the theme. In the pre-1914 world, states were not noticeably less aggressive than in present-day international society, but the lack of off-rail transport and a residual attachment to diplomatic convention resulted in a certain time span between hostility and, quote, hostilities. The modern pattern of military operations, the surprise attack and undeclared war, has as a natural consequence the military peace. Instead of small professional armies acting as cadres for wartime expansion, many states attempt to maintain permanent armies capable of immediate defense, and therefore offense. The rise of ideology-based revolutionary parties on both right and left has led to a similar expansion of internal security forces. Political branches and police forces, paramilitary internal security forces, undercover secret police outfits have all become common features of many states, including democratic ones. In the 1930s, the United States had fewer than 300,000 men in its armed forces. The only significant intelligence operation was a small and supremely efficient code-breaking outfit, while internal security forces were limited to a few T-men of the presidential bodyguard and a relatively tame and low-budget FBI. Today, the U.S. Marine Corps alone has more than 280,000 men in uniform, while the entire military establishment has a population, which at 3,400,000 outnumbers the civilian population of many UN member countries. The intelligence community has developed into a many-headed bureaucratic monster, composed of the CIA, the equally important NSA, the service intelligence outfits, and many defense research institutions. In the internal security field, The FBI has tolerated no competitors except in specialized work, but it has grown into a mini CIA with several thousand agents working in the political as opposed to the criminal function. No state has been able to emulate such a luxuriant growth, and even the other superpower, the Soviet Union, has found it impossible to keep up with the USA, in spite of the fact that it gets some of its facilities on the cheap, a la Kim Philby. Without being able to keep up with the USA, most states have done their very best. Even a medium-sized country like Italy, with no hostile neighbors of military consequence, with no serious insurgency, and with a tame and parliamentary communist party, has found it necessary to develop an extensive system, comprising 2 national police forces, several security agencies, a 300,000-man army, a 40,000-man navy, and a large air force. Other more embattled states enroll practically the whole population in various kinds of defense and security forces. Israel, surrounded by avowed enemies, with weak natural defenses, unprotected by military alliances, is an extreme case. Though it only has the population of a medium-sized city, it was able to field more than 250,000 men and women in the June 1967 war. From the point of view of the coup, the size and power of the armed forces, police, and security agencies is both a great obstacle and a great help. On the one hand, as Trotsky pointed out, the improvement in weapons, transport, and communications has widened the gap between organized military forces and civilians equipped with improvised means. Trotsky noted that while the French mobs of 1789 could rush positions defended by infantry soldiers, in 1917 a Russian mob, however large and determined, would be cut down by modern automatic weapons. By modern he meant the clumsy and slow-firing Maxim machine gun. Today, every single soldier on mob control could be armed with a weapon giving a similar rate of fire. On the other hand, the increase in the size of uniformed forces and the technological revolution have improved the characteristics of state security systems as a recruitment ground for the coup. The modern army or security force is usually too large to be a coherent social unit bound by traditional loyalties. The need for technically minded personnel has broken the barriers that often limited recruitment to particular social groups within each country. Pathans and Bedouin may be picturesque and politically very reliable, but they are inadequate as pilots, tank crews, or even to staff a modern police force. The fact that the personnel of the state security system is both numerous and diverse means that we, the planners of the coup, will be able to infiltrate the system. In doing so, we will have the dual task of turning a few of its component units into active participants of the coup, while neutralizing the others. This does not mean that we have to fight them, but merely that we have to prevent their possible intervention against us for the limited time span of the coup. Whether the purpose of our infiltration and subversion of the defenses of the state is to turn the unit concerned into an active participant of the coup, or whether it's merely defensive, the methods to be followed will depend on the character of each particular organization. The raw material for our efforts is the whole spectrum of the coercive forces of the state, and as these vary substantially in their equipment, deployment, and psychological outlook, we shall examine them separately. Thus concludes section 5.6 of Coup D'Etat by Edward Luttwak. Tomorrow we will be in section 5.7, still in chapter 3, the strategy of the Coup D'Etat. I will see you then. Olam.